What happens when a nanny gets arrested for being too caring and too black? What a 5-year-old girl said in that courtroom left the entire country speechless. When Chanel Watson stepped out of Piedmont Park, the air was thick enough to chew. The Atlanta sun had slapped the city with that sticky August heat that curled hairlines and melted tempers. But Chanel didn't flinch. No, ma'am. She moved with the sure-footed grace of a woman raised to handle storms, literal and otherwise. One hand gripped the tiny fingers of Lily Blake, a 5-year-old bundle of freckles and golden curls. The other hand held a paper bag of peanut butter crackers and a juice box. Chanel had long since learned a hungry child turns into a courtroom. Now, this wasn't just any walk home. This was the final stretch of a long day. She'd spent the afternoon braiding Lily's damp curls after a splash in the park fountain, wiping sticky fingers, and explaining, for the 1,000th time, why dogs don't wear shoes. Chanel did it all with that kind of patience that's either holy or hard-earned. She paused under an elm tree near the sidewalk. Lily's sandal had come undone. Chanel knelt down on one knee and just like her own mother used to, fastened the strap gently, then kissed Lily's forehead. It was one of those small, tender moments you don't think twice about, until the sound of screeching tires made the whole block hold its breath. 2 police cars roared up like they were chasing an armed fugitive. Sirens off, but lights blazing. 4 officers, all white, all tight-jawed, came pouring out like they had something to prove. One had his hand already dancing on his holster. Chanel blinked once. Lily squeezed her hand tighter. "Step away from the child," one of them barked. "Excuse you." Chanel slowly rose, back straight. "I'm her nanny," she said, carefully enunciating every syllable, like a woman who knew the difference between compliance and submission. "Hands up, now!" another officer shouted, voice hot with urgency. It wasn't a request. It was a verdict. Lily burst into tears. Chanel didn't. Not because she wasn't afraid. Oh, she was. But because she knew tears would only feed the narrative they were already writing in their heads. The uncooperative suspect, the agitated aggressor, the threat. So she raised her hands. She kneeled. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just let her dignity take a back seat while a crowd of cell phones and whispering bystanders gathered like moths to tragedy. "I'm Chanel Watson," she said clearly. "I work for the Blakes. That's their daughter. We're walking home from the park." But justice don't always come with listening ears. "She's lying," a voice cried out from the crowd. A woman in yoga pants and the kind of confidence that makes you think she shops at Whole Foods just for the Instagram. "She grabbed the child. I saw it. I saw everything." Well, bless her eyesight. That third eye must have been working overtime. One officer immediately stepped forward. "Where's your ID? Where's proof you're her nanny? You got papers?" Chanel held her breath. Because of course she didn't carry around an employment contract. Who does that? Ain't no white nanny pulling resumes out her purse while picking up groceries. But here she was, expected to prove her innocence, like she'd just been caught stealing somebody's baby off the playground. Before she could speak again, cold metal locked around her wrists, the kind that digs into skin and memory. One shove, 2 clicks. She was in the back seat of the cruiser, windows rolled up tight like she was contagious. And Lily? Lily was screaming, "Don't take her! She's my mama! She's my mama!" The street fell silent. Those words didn't just echo, they thundered. Grown folks stopped mid-step, phones lowered. Even the officers looked rattled, but it was too late. Chanel was already cuffed. And in this country, black folks don't get uncuffed just because truth shows up inconveniently. At the precinct, the air was stale and sour. That same blend of overworked coffee and stale injustice. Chanel sat in the corner, wrists raw, ankles aching. The officers chatted like they were in a break room, not a holding station. She could hear them down the hall. Called herself a nanny. Yeah, right. The kid called her mama, probably coached. Maybe she's part of some trafficking ring. Happens all the time. They didn't see a woman. They saw a headline. They saw a case they wanted to close before lunch. Enter Lieutenant Hopkins, a man who looked like he'd never lost an argument, mostly because he talked over anyone who tried. Big gut, bigger ego. He squinted at Chanel like she was gum stuck to the precinct floor. Separate the child. I want her with a child psychologist, he ordered. If the woman brainwashed her, we'll find out. Brainwashed. Like love could only be believable if it came in the right shade. Lily was taken into a pastel-colored room filled with dolls and crayons and a therapist with a voice like chamomile tea. Lily, do you know who the woman is who was with you? She's my Chanel, Lily said firmly. She's my nanny. She's my mama. Sweetheart, you know your real mommy is someone else, right? I know who loves me when I cry, Lily replied. That's real. Meanwhile, out in the chaos, Chanel sat still. If they were trying to scare her, they should have come better prepared. Her fear wasn't quiet. It was calculated. She wasn't about to break, not in front of men who'd already decided she was guilty the moment they saw her skin. And then, like a whirlwind in heels and a power suit, Abigail Blake stormed through the precinct doors. Where Lily had whimpered, Abigail roared, "Where is my daughter? Where is Chanel? Who in this godforsaken precinct made the call to arrest the woman raising my child?" Hopkins puffed out his chest. "We had reports of suspicious behavior. She matched the description. There was a witness." "You mean a Karen with a yoga mat and a superiority complex?" Abigail snapped. "Let me be crystal clear. Chanel has been with us since January. She was with my daughter when I was in recovery. She is the only reason Lily didn't fall apart. You think some contract matters more than that?" Behind her stood her lawyer, a man with a leather briefcase and a look that said lawsuits were his love language. "Prepare yourselves," he told the room, "because the civil rights violations here are stacking up faster than your defense statements." Chanel was released after 6 hours. No apology, no explanation, just the cold unlocking of handcuffs and the unceremonious, "You're free to go." She stepped out of the precinct into the humid night air, and there was Lily, running toward her, arms wide, face blotchy from crying. "Mama," she yelled, loud and proud, like she was reclaiming a word the world tried to rip from her lips. And Chanel? She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just dropped to her knees and held that little girl like she was made of light. Behind her, cameras clicked. Stories were already forming. And somewhere deep inside her chest, something shifted. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. What happens next will make you want to stand up and shout. Chanel's fire is just getting started, and you're going to want front row seats. Stay tuned. The next morning, the internet burned hotter than the humid heat of an Atlanta August. Every platform from neighborhood Facebook feeds to high-profile legal forums and TikTok therapists was ablaze with the video of a black nanny being forced face down onto the asphalt over the horror-stricken screams of a child who refused to release her grip on hope. Under the hashtag #KeKershan She Is My Mom, stories erupted. Echoes of survival, memories of love that overshadowed biology, and bitter truth tests of an America that demands love be earned all over again when your skin is brown. One comment, searing in its clarity, "This is America. You still gotta prove you're allowed to love if you don't look like them." Yet Atlanta's police department remained silent, stubborn as a stubborn stain, locking their lips as if hoping the viral outrage would burn itself out. No apologies, no taking ownership, just the steady hum of bureaucracy, as though catastrophic injustice could vanish if unspoken, and silence would be the world's polite lie. Chanel Watson, ironically, was also silent. Yet each second she sat in the hush, the world rose another decibel, wanting her voice. Journalists with recorders and deadlines, bloggers with shared outrage, even a senator landing in her DMs with a public support ping. "Allow me to support you publicly." Support versus help. Those are worlds apart, and Chanel knew it intuitively. Public support may sound good, but it can leave you standing on a stage with nowhere to go. Inside her apartment, there was almost no sound, only the distant click of the vent door and the soft, labored breathing of Lily, curled into her side like a lifeline, even in sleep, convinced, rightly or not, that if she loosened her grip, this fragile new connection might slip away. That child-level instinct to cling danced across Chanel's chest like a second heartbeat. Abigail sat on the floor, bare feet pressed to creaking hardwood, wearing a faded Yale-branded tee that looked out of place with the current turmoil, her eyes studying Chanel like she'd just met her. After hours of tense silence, she finally spoke, voice loaded as if she carried the weight of every black mother who'd been required to justify her love. "Why aren't you speaking?" Chanel met her gaze, slow and deliberate, the kind of unmoving patience only time teaches a black woman. Because white anger becomes a headline, but black anger is always a threat. Your press conference won't save me. They'll arrest me again the moment I say the wrong thing. Abigail's face fell. Pain and respect tangled behind her eyes. In that moment, it felt like an irreversible shift. This wasn't, as she'd thought, an isolated injustice. It was systemic. It hugged every corner of their morning, glared from every frame photo, seeped into every bureaucratic dead end. That afternoon, an official, or unofficial, summons arrived. An invitation to meet with Child Protective Services. A routine check, they said, to verify Lily's well-being. But as black mothers and caregivers know instinctively, routine is a loaded word when sweeping accusations lurk beneath, especially once your face is already trending, your voice tainted by the court of public scrutiny. Inside the CPS office, under fluorescent lights that drained every shade of hope, a woman in a gray suit sat behind a steel desk, her expression brittle, eyes like flamingos who lost their flight plan. She cleared her throat before officialdom kicked in. "Ms. Watson, our offices received a claim that your care might have posed a threat to the child's welfare." Chanel tilted her head slightly, doubt sharpening her tone. "You mean threat from me, or from the officers who shoved a loaded gun at my temple?" The caseworker adjusted her glasses, small beads of sweat betraying a faint panic, as she said without looking up. "That allegation was anonymous. Said you manipulated the child into calling you mother." A knowing laugh, bitter, low, came from Chanel's lips. "You call it manipulation when I kneel to tie her sandal, read her bedtime stories, hold her when she coughs, heart dripping with intention? Then you call love a crime?" Paper rustled. The room drained of sound except for heartbeats that felt like drum beats in Chanel's ears. The word right felt nowhere near accurate. At home that evening, Chanel powered on her laptop like she was firing up a laser-guided weapon. She stared at the blank blogging page until the blankness filled with all the weight she carried. The invisible motherhood she embodied, the love denied by policy, the unearned guilt placed on people who dared to be kind while black. She typed about being the second mother in a house where the first wore Prada, carried designer bags, and delegated love, but didn't check doorstep handprints before dismissing help. She came to clean injuries, to dry tears, to fight fevers. Yet within seconds, her skin made law enforcement imagine malice where there was mercy. She didn't write a weepy elegy. She wrote a rallying cry with steel in its spine, acid in its pen, a line destined to be quotable. "I was the black nanny until I became the suspect. In America, you can be kind, you can be gentle, you can be nurturing, but if your skin is black, you better be ready for the cuffs." That post lit the fuse. Thousands shared. Tens of thousands commented. Media outlets clipped her words, labeling them viral truth bombs. But the blowback was swift, like quicksand under credibility. The Atlanta Department of Education quietly opened a probe into the Blakes' unlicensed pedagogical influence. Suddenly, every bedtime story looked like clandestine indoctrination. Their homes and hearts became suspect. They dragged her into multiple hearings. Abigail's lawyer fought back, but the system's gears were already grinding, chewing delightlessly at a woman who merely dared to care. The police issued internal reports painting Chanel as emotionally unstable. The psychological report from earlier had claimed Lily showed signs of excessive attachment, as if love itself were a psychiatric condition. And then she snapped. Not inside a courtroom or during an interview, but live on Facebook, with no filter, no makeup, no stage-managed phrasing, just a black woman in her robe, clutching a mug of tea, with circles under her eyes and rage in her voice. "My name is Chanel Watson. I am black. I am a nanny. But if you look at me and see danger, you aren't afraid of my color. You're afraid that black skin can contain pure, unconditional love. And that scares your fragile world. I am not a victim. I am a witness. The system likes to squash people like me. But today, I am tired of fear. And I am not alone. The press conference that followed, awkward, disjointed, because they weren't ready for elegant defiance. They sought tears, contrition, or resignation. What they got was composed confrontation. When the chief said, "We regret if our actions were perceived as excessive," Chanel raised a brow so sharply the tension nearly created sparks. "No," she said, voice deliberate and cutting. "You regret the video went viral. You regret the optics, not the act." Silence. Then murmurs. A flush of confession. Authenticity crashing into PR lines. By next morning, a legal letter arrived. All complaints dropped. All records expunged. All investigations dismissed. Chanel didn't celebrate. Because she knew victory isn't measured in arrests avoided. It's measured by whether next time someone else doesn't land face first on concrete for tying a sandal. And in the echo of her words, the entire city felt a shift. This is the moment where lines are drawn, shields are held. You're witnessing a reckoning. Stay with us. Chanel's voice is just beginning to redefine every whisper of love, every demand for respect. The world was waiting for the final act, and not just quietly. This wasn't some whisper in the wind meant to drift away. No, everyone from online activists to church ladies in Harlem had leaned in, sensing that this story, of a woman dragged face down onto asphalt for daring to care, could not simply fizzle out like bad afternoon gossip, and that if America chose silence, it would speak volumes to every black woman who had ever done kind, only to be crushed by protocol. America does not apologize well, if at all. It might throw money at the problem or masquerade sorrow with polite speeches, but a genuine "I'm sorry" is rare. Until that afternoon in the very same municipal building where Chanel Watson had once been cuffed, a public hearing was scheduled under the guise of rebuilding trust, an attempt to make peace where there had been violence, to sow sanity over a gash the world could no longer ignore. So when she stepped into that sterile chamber, wearing a crisp white blazer, shoulders squared with cold determination, flanked by Abigail, stern as a judge, each foot planted in purpose, and Lily, whose sunflower-patterned dress swayed a little as her small hand found Chanel's, and journalists filled rows with cameras humming in readiness, and a hush spread over the crowd that felt like anticipation before a verdict or the moment before an anthem. Something shifted, because silence in that moment had the weight of sacred grief and the electric charge of revolution. Behind a raised dais sat four officials, three men in ties that screamed "professional imprimatur," and a woman clutching papers so tightly her knuckles looked like they might fracture the wood desk. Behind them, the city seal hung impassive, and above, bold letters declared, "Community justice starts here." It felt almost like someone had left the lights on in a house where justice had walked out, and now the stair creaked under her cautious re-entry. "Ms. Watson, are you prepared to address the assembly?" asked one of the male commissioners, voice even but charged enough that all eyes swung toward her. Chanel rose from her seat, not with trembling knees, but with the quiet authority of someone who refused to be defined by that night on the pavement. And she didn't face the commissioners. She faced the crowd, eyes flicking from first row to last, narrowing slightly on the man who'd shoved his arm in her child's face, and the woman who'd whispered, "Watch her." "You expect me to perform," she began, voice calm but cold, with a kind of control that forced attention, "to cry on cue, offer forgiveness, or unleash rage so you can call me aggressive? I will not perform. Instead, I will give you facts, sharp, inconvenient facts and nothing more." With each word, she laid down evidence in stacks, pressed forms, medical reports detailing how often she'd soothed Lily's wheezing, parent-teacher meeting logs, proving her active role in the child's education, receipts showing her personal investment in toys and books, and, most damning, the crumpled, police-issued handcuffs she placed on the table and nudged forward. "This is America," she continued, voice rising slightly, an open wound threaded through every sentence, where a woman who cares for a child has no right to protection if her skin isn't the right shade. You wouldn't have cuffed a white nanny, even if she dragged a girl in a bag, and yet you put me face first on concrete for fixing a sandal strap. A low murmur spread, but she held up a hand, silencing them. What's most horrifying isn't the humiliation you heaped on me, she hissed, but that my child, my 5-year-old, was the first to realize that the woman who calls her beloved mama is considered a threat because she's black. That is what you broke. Somebody coughed behind the desk, an involuntary reaction from someone unprepared to feel guilt in real time. We acknowledge the mistake, began one official. Chanel interjected. No, you acknowledged a PR problem, not a moral wrong, and do not offer apologies out of habit or looming lawsuits. If not for the cameras, you would have swept me into silence. Turning to Lily, whose wide eyes glistened with both fear and pride, Chanel nodded once, prompting the child to speak. I love Chanel, Lily declared, voice steady as a small bell, because she is my mother, because she cares, and you don't. And in that echo of a child's voice, the room held its breath, as if the echoes carried more force than any adult testimony. Silence became a roar, louder than any heated debate. Within a week, a lawsuit was filed. Abigail pressed forward, not for money, but to demand accountability, transparency, and reform. And alongside that legal bid, Chanel and a small army of Black, Latina, and Asian caregivers founded a grassroots organization called Motherhood is a Verb, a coalition to raise funds for legal defense, parenting education, mental health support, because nobody should face cuffs for demonstrating compassion. Lieutenant Hopkins found his career evaporate without fanfare. One day his portrait hung in the precinct, the next, gone. Other complaints rose like bubbles to the surface once the dam broke. People finally spoke out. They spoke from the shadows because shadows gave cover for too long. A major television network offered Chanel a reality show. Brave Hearts, Justice for Moms, Nanny Chronicles. But she declined. She refused to package her pain as entertainment. I'm not here for ratings. This is my life, and the lives of countless others holding it together without spectacle, she said, making sure they heard that her suffering wasn't a storyline, but a skeleton key opening hidden doors of a systemic bias. In a subsequent legal proceeding, one that lacked formal terminology but carried emotional weight, the judge from Brooklyn, progressive in a way that felt like sunrise after storm, granted Lily what Chanel called in private a dual mother custody recognition. A ruling that Chanel remained a permanent, primary parental figure in the child's life, even if not listed on birth certificates. Official documentation followed in the local press the next day. Watson granted ongoing caregiver rights. Chanel didn't shed tears in the courtroom, but later, as she tucked Lily into bed, brushing damp curls from the child's forehead, she whispered, "Will you always be my baby?" Lily's response came soft, yet sure. "Forever?" Chanel shook her head slowly, voice catching. "Forever, sweetheart. Even when you're 80, I'll still be here. Maybe in a different world, but beside you all the same." A year passed and Chanel's memoir, Black Mother, White America, was published. Unsentimental, unflinching, tasting like espresso with no sugar. Readers weren't tree-warm and mellow. Many were stirred to tears. Not rapture, but raw recognition. One woman in Louisiana wrote, "My mother was a nanny too. Her black hands tucked us in, called us Ma in secret, only to be seen as cleaning help by adults. Thank you for telling our truth." And the final curve in this arc? It couldn't be a neat, Instagram-approved sunset. Chanel now teaches. Not at some elite college, but at a local training center for aspiring caregivers, Black, brown, immigrant, and marginalized, showing them how to nurture, how to claim space, how to love firmly and fearlessly without allowing walls of bias to collapse them. She teaches how to speak, not for shock, but for respect. In a recent interview, they asked, "What one word would you want Lily to say to describe you? To the world?" Chanel paused, a small knowing smile settling as though the answer had lived inside her forever. "Enough." Why? Because in this country, people like us are always told we're not enough. Not quiet enough, not white enough, not proper enough. I want my daughter, and every girl who looks like her, to stand tall and say with clarity, I am enough, without apology. The cruel irony here is that the word that changed everything, her life and her child's faith, wasn't mama, but enough. That two-syllable declaration not only broke Chanel's fall, it closed centuries of silence and opened a new indictment of what happens when love, black love, refuses to be second class. So if this story lit something inside you, hold on to that spark. Don't let it burn out in silence, because while we stay quiet, decisions get made about who is permitted to love, to belong, to be human. But we, by every right, carry the power to challenge that narrative, because those who've endured the system and refuse to bend are exactly the ones history learns to honor.